Coach and counselor explores how today's youth benefit from intentional, empowering adult leadership. Each episode blends perspectives from coaches, mentors, players, and mental health professionals, shaping the next generation on and off the field. From tough conversations to inspiring transformations, we dive into what it takes to support young people in today's world. The show, we have Dave Hodges on the show with us today, who has quite the extensive career in baseball and in football and mostly in rugby. Starting off as a football player in college, won as an athlete, all-conference team, captain of the football team at Occidental, MVP of the collegiate league that he was in, a Kodak All-American, and then a two-time All-American collegiate football player. Didn't play football after that, but makes the transition into rugby, which we'll get from Dave exactly how all that happened. But rugby career was even better than the football career, as a two-time player of the year, was on the USA national team and was captain 27 different times. On the national team 54 times, Rugby Board of Directors, was inducted into the Rugby Hall of Fame. And, one of my favorite little side notes about Dave was Rugby Player of the Decade. Anytime I introduced Dave to one of my friends, I was like, the guy was Rugby Player of the Decade. Like, I think I'd have that stamped on my shirt, one of the coolest things. So 8-year professional, at least, right? 8-year professional rugby career, coached on the...
Yeah, it was 8 years. Yeah.
8 years. USA Rugby, a coach, director, video analyst, GM. I mean, he's been there, done that. He's, one of the faces of rugby. Quite the introduction, but definitely needed. Dave, welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to be on and talking about some sports issues.
Yes, sports issues.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us, literally, let's start and tell us about, obviously you had quite the football career, but how did this whole transition from football to rugby actually happen?
Well, it was interesting at Occidental College. We were a smaller school. Our coach at the time let the guys play rugby in the offseason. He changed his stance a little bit on that after I left. But there was a lot of guys. I didn't know much about the game and seen it a couple times as a kid, but there was a lot of guys on the football team that played rugby in the off season. Kind of interesting if we talk about multi-sport athletes, and I think it definitely made me a better football player. But that was basically how I just went along to a practice with some of the guys. They asked me if I wanted to go, and it was kind of a natural sport for me, just because I think, that cross combination of football and playing soccer in high school. I should say, I played soccer as a kid all the way through high school and stopped when I went to college. But I think those two sports are pretty natural when it comes to rugby, because there's, the physicality of football and there's some football skills or footballing skills or soccer skills, if you will. And it was just something that I loved, because being a defensive player, I got to it's like basketball. So you have offense and defense. You got to have the ball in your hand as well, which only, if you cover a fumble or make a pick in football, that's the only chance you're going to see the football as a linebacker.
Right. So you make this, transition, you go to basically a tryout. Like what really happened there?
So in football, it was NCAA and it wasn't really tryouts, but with rugby, it was at our school, it was a club sport. So, but there was various ways to progress through the sport. It was pretty well defined at that time. They'd had a Southern California team and then a Pacific Coast team, and then All Americans, and those teams all actually played. Um, so it wasn't just a name team. And then, based on those things, some of the guys would get recognized when they made it to the national team or just be in a development pathway, which is kind of my track. But I chased football after college for a couple of years and went over to Germany, and um, that was fun. But I could tell it wasn't a long term sustainable thing. So it was more of a fun thing to be playing football in Germany. Although I was hoping it would lead to something. But about that time, a coach from San Diego, which was the most successful team in the U.S. It was all amateur back then. Um, Called me and said, "We're pretty good at putting guys on the national team. You want to come down here and play?" And so that was, he'd talked to me after school, but I said, "I'm chasing football." And then a few years later, he called me again, and I made the switch, and it was a pretty quick crack for me after that.
Yep. I'm sure you appreciate his persistence and looking back on your career now. If you didn't make that second call, you wouldn't have had a rugby career at all, maybe.
Yeah, and speaking of crossover, he was a high school. He was he was a rugby guy, but he was also a teacher and high school football coach, and so he understood recruiting, and I think he had some experience collegiately as a coach as well. And so his name is Ben Dawson. He was like, as much as he was a good coach, he was a better recruit. Like his nights were hammering the phone and getting the best players come to San Diego. And when I got in the team, the whole team was either former or current national team player across the whole team.
Wow. And then so your journey through rugby took you through, a bunch of different countries throughout your career, right? So give us the high level version of, kind of how you bounced around between, different
Yeah,
different teams throughout your playing career.
yeah. I when I was in San Diego, I gave myself 2 years. I was gonna like, that's it. I'm gonna give it everything, every measure, and if it don't make the national team after that, then I'll go to work for my dad and take over the family business. And within a year, I'd made the national team, so that was out the window. And so I was in it. And at the time, so rugby been amateur up until 1995. Just it was like the Olympics, but they were losing a lot of players to another version called rugby league, and it was very strong in Northern England and Australia, and they paid players since the early 1900s. So all the best players in rugby union, which is the one everyone typically thinks of when they think of rugby, um, were going over to rugby league to get paid. And so the people at World Rugby, which was or was the organization. Um, Sorry, it was the International Rugby Board at the time. It's now called World Rugby, that runs kind of like FIFA for soccer, right? They run the sport around the world. They decided to make the game so-called open and pay players. So um, after the second year of professionalism, I realized that all the guys that I was competing against were playing professionally, and so I needed to get out of the not the amateur environment and go compete against the best players in the world. And so I started searching opportunities in Europe, and just literally my own agent emailing clubs. And my club, the Athlete Scarlets, who signed me, I played for 7 of the 8 years I was over in Wales. Uh, they emailed me right back. We just played Wales in the summer, so they had video of me, and off they billed it as the first so-called internet signing. It's that was early days, like 1996, of the internet. So yeah, that was how a little bit of long-winded way of how I ended up in Europe and playing professional rugby.
How was the how was the pay back then? Was it enough to live
Part
on?
of well, it was enough to live on, but just it was that it was me taking a chance and them taking a chance, right? So, but at the same time, rugby was going through some significant. There, it went from amateur to professional overnight, and in the sense of people that ran the game too, because they weren't experienced at running a professional organization and sports organization. So a lot of teams went under. They overspent on players. So I was great because I was I wasn't the finished product, but I was fit and strong, could make tackles, and was cheap. So it was
So they loved you.
and at a point where they were struggling for money, they were struggling money wise. It was good value, I think. Not, and there was certainly better players than me in terms of skill, but I think the professionalism that I brought was in strength and conditioning and my experience in tackling.
It, and so the struggles with rugby, I mean, they kind of persisted for a while, right? And so over the last, let's just say 20 years, how has rugby evolved as a whole across the world? But, has it really taken off in the States as they have expected it to?
Yeah, I mean, those long termers like me, we always want it to be faster, but it, I guess there's been some significant things happening. It would be great if more people played the game, and then that creates more fans and more engagement and more sponsors. But having said that, on the men's side, there's a professional league that's been going for 8 years. So, in a pretty competitive sport, in the most competitive sports market in the world, in the U.S., that's no small feat because you've seen a lot of football leagues start and fold, and other sports only make 1 or 2 years. So they're going on nine, and that's Major League Rugby. So they're going on 9 years. Certainly not easy, and there's no return on investing in a rugby team at the moment in the U.S. And it's challenging to market across the world as well. And it's just struggling to get a foothold in that, like in Europe, and if you're in England, like as much as those teams are storied and have the history, they're competing against football, where as we say, soccer, and it's just a challenging sports market to make it work and to get those fans to come and the sponsors to put the money in.
So, yes, if we're going to grow rugby in the States or across the world, oh, and you're a football player currently, right? I mean, that's kind of probably where you're going to get some of your best opportunities as some athletes. What type of athlete fits the mold? Like if you're not going to make it to the NFL, you're a great college player, you're potentially not getting drafted in the NFL. What type of player makes that transition from football to rugby successful?
That's a great question, and it's something that I feel because that was my path. I was a football player, and we've had a lot of success with football players that are even better than me in rugby over the years, and not even better, but they're just players that are great athletes that made the transition and became great rugby players. So, but I think one of the challenges is that first off, you take off the pads, so it's pretty much there's no blocking in rugby, but outside of that, it's full on carrying the ball full speed and making a tackle at full speed. So can you get past that in terms of not having that protection? I think most football players are okay with that, but some it's like, no, I'd rather give it a miss. But it's also, there's a lot more repeated speed events. So there's the plays in football are 3, 4, 5, 8, maybe 9 seconds, and in rugby you can go up to a minute and a half, 2 minutes without stopping. So there's a lot more, sprint, jog, sprint, tackle, get up, challenge the tackle, rest. I guess for those not familiar with rugby, there's like a wrestling component involved while you're sprinting, getting up off the ground. So it's it requires a completely different energy system. So
It's
as
almost
long as you're willing to change your
it's almost the endurance level of a soccer player with the physicality of a football player, and that combination of that
right.
athlete. Yeah.
And it's not like a long distance run. It's like sprinting and explosive bouts. And then very, very little, maybe the recovery is a jog while you're still in the play until it's your time to be explosive and sprint again. So that's one of the, but I think overall we need better athletes in the game in the US. And this is complicating things because there's sevens rugby, which is the Olympic version. So it's seven. Normally rugby's 15 on 15. In the Olympics, it's 7-on-7. So very short games. They're less than 20 minutes, 7-minute halves, and you play 3 a day. So that just fits more in the Olympic window. So that's why you can play it over 3 or 4 days, whereas the traditional version, you have to have a week recovery. It doesn't fit in the 2-week Olympic window. But anyway, so we had some great sprinters in sevens. You got two guys that became some of the best sevens players in the world, Perry Baker and Carlin Isles, both retired now. But the old mantra of speed kills, like they both racked up which scores in rugby are tries, and they both were leaders on the professional circuit. So I think the answer is staring us right in the face that we need about 50 of those guys, and maybe it could produce a team of 12, which is what you have in sevens. Because not all of them are going to make the transition, right?
Yeah. And you brought it up earlier about specialization and kind of just cruised over it, but is that thought of early specialization, which we talk about a lot on this show, is that part of what's hurting the growth of rugby, right? Because people are specializing. They're going down the baseball path only, or the football path only, or whatever path that they happen to go down. They go down that early, and so they become really very good at what they do, but very specialized, and making that transition later in life becomes more difficult.
Yeah, and I think it's not impossible if you've only played basketball or if you only played football to transition to rugby. But it's a lot easier if you've had in my path where I had a lot of sports, but I gravitated to football and soccer in high school. After playing baseball and basketball, as well as swimming and a few other things. So I think it just makes it easier to play another sport. Typically, not always, but when you had some background, I was thinking about before our call. I was thinking about how some of the like basketball players, like if you make a transition, if you're playing basketball and rugby, there's ball at the highest point, getting the ball at the highest point, like on a rebound, that's usually translatable to rugby. I think not all rugby coaches believe that, but I see it in the game, and I see that when the ball's kicked high in the air, those that are able to get it up at the highest point versus somebody that tries to catch it like that, you're just going to have an advantage. So that's like a transferable skill. As our kids did with skiing, like, being able to see the fall line of a mountain and pick your route down, certainly in rugby, and be able to see the bigger picture and how to navigate through a defense when you're carrying the ball or making a pass or put someone else through space. I think those things all translate. So, but I also think rugby, the people that, from the world perspective, have a hard time because what they know is traditional development, and they don't always believe that, even though we've seen it, I've done it. I've made the transition. Those two guys I mentioned, and Perry Baker and Carlin Isles, were electric, and the answer, like I said, staring us right in the face. We just haven't actually gone out and created a program to get those guys. They've fallen into rugby versus harvesting them, I guess.
Right. So let's do a quick little transition into your coaching career
Yeah.
before we kind of get into some other higher level questions of so like everyone, right? Your career ends probably sooner than anyone ever wants to admit. Um, but you got into coaching and you've done a lot of different things for professional rugby, USA Rugby, from as you mentioned earlier, video analytics to being a GM to coaching. Tell us about that, that career path that you had there, and the difficulties that you have in USA Rugby in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think originally there's a lot with the professional league now, there's a lot more opportunities. But when I came back, if you wanted to be in rugby and make a living at it, you pretty much had to work for USA Rugby if you wanted to be in this. Otherwise, I would have, I mean, I could have stayed in Wales or in Europe and um, made a living. But my wife was ready to be home. So, and she did her time over there, and that's fair. And I was too, to be fair. So I probably could have stuck it out a few more years, but it was if you were going to make a living that. And so um, when I came back, I was coaching, or I did coaching as an assistant coach with the national team, but I also had to work in youth development to make a salary work. And then further down the road, when I came back the second time to USA Rugby, I had to not only be assistant coach, but the analyst for the team. So while I was doing double time, while all the other guys, the other assistant coaches were watching their focus, whether it be, the defensive coach or the attack coach or forwards coach, whatever, before I could get to doing that, I had to break down all the video of an 80-minute game in minute detail, and then I could get on to evaluating what the guys that I was responsible for did. So it was just cobbling out a full-time living that way in the initial stages when I came back. And like I said, now there's a lot more opportunity. There's 11 teams in Major League Rugby that you can have strike a career out, and USA Rugby.
That's great. That's great. I'm glad there's a lot more opportunity. So we're about halfway through this at this point. We need to take a quick break for our sponsor, Operation Player Assist. When we come back, let's talk about now this transition as a parent and coaching your own son, coaching other kids, and then the key to being what are some of the mistakes that you made that you try to make sure that your own son or that other kids that you coach didn't make. I'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.
As we're talking about the challenges coaches face with young athletes, it reminds me of something that affects every youth sports organization, the administrative nightmare that can pull coaches away from actually coaching. I recently spoke with Jennifer from the Riverside Youth Soccer League, and she told me something that really stuck with me. She said, "We were spending more time managing registrations and chasing down forms than we were developing players." Sound familiar? That's exactly why organizations across the country are turning to OperationPlayerAssist.com. They specialize in handling all those behind-the-scenes headaches that eat up your time. Registration systems that actually work, automated communication tools that keep parents informed without blowing up your phone, and emergency response protocols that give you confidence when things go sideways. Jennifer's League saw immediate results. Registration time cut in half, parent complaints about communication dropped to almost zero, and here's the best part: coaches could focus on coaching instead of paperwork. If you are tired of administrative chaos stealing time from what really matters, developing young athletes, I encourage you to schedule a free 15-minute demo with the team at OperationPlayerAssist.com. See firsthand how they can streamline your operation. Visit OperationPlayerAssist.com and click Schedule Demo to book your 15-minute consultation, because when the administrative burden is lighter, everyone wins. Coaches, parents, and most importantly, the kids. OperationPlayerAssist.com, supporting the game behind the game.
All right, back from that quick break. Appreciate our sponsor, Operation Player Assist. Dave, we just kind of journeyed your playing and coaching career in the first half of this. Now let's really, dive into, raising a son that's, now a collegiate baseball player and has gone through a journey of multiple different sports as well, carving his own path, and some of the mistakes that you made in your coaching and playing career that you tried to make sure that you didn't make in raising your own son. Let's start there. How was that transition for you of, being a dad and coaching your own kid?
Probably not the best. to be honest. Like, not that it was, it was very intentional to try to give him the best opportunity, but, um, I think sometimes I could just on my perspective now, looking back on it, um, I think the biggest challenge was, you know, probably listening to what really gave him joy in sports, I guess. And we certainly provided opportunity. Like initially, that wasn't an issue. He got to play tons of different sports and enjoy them, or not. Our kids were both involved in swimming together. He didn't like that. Like, I mean, they did. It was kind of fun initially, but then after a while, he just hated swimming, even though he was a pretty good swimmer, which I encouraged him to stay in, but he just hated it. So that's one of those things. I guess in terms of, um, I guess if he had really gravitated more to rugby, I probably could have provided better assistance to him. And, we certainly leaned on you guys in terms of some of the baseball stuff, but I wasn't that familiar with baseball. And I guess where I would say encourage when you're a sport that you're not familiar with as a parent, I think from my experience, just asking more questions of players / parents that have gone before you, that are older, of the organization you're thinking about being involved with, and just being really inquisitive. I probably should have done more of that as he gravitated towards baseball.
So yeah, when you made the comment of, kind of just being aware of the things that brought him joy, you think there were some earlier cues or clues to him gravitating toward baseball, and that was really the sport that he wanted to pursue, and really allowing that to happen, or embracing that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I didn't say, I mean, the opportunity would have been there to play rugby, and he actually contemplated it as middle school, but he's had a number of injuries, and he didn't want, baseball was his thing, and he didn't want to go into baseball season, after he'd had an injury previous year, injured. So even though he was curious about rugby, he never took it up, which is fine because baseball is what he enjoyed.
Yep. So in this journey through your parenting side of coaching, what did you find yourself, like what niche or what worked for you on balancing that act of coach and player? And then second part of that question is, do you think there was ever a difficulty for your son to overcome? Like, dad's literally, I'll say it again, rugby player of the decade, a Hall of Famer. Like that's gotta be, I always think about that with, the Deion Sanders of the world or the Ken Griffey's of the world of, is there just a level of unwritten pressure for an athlete in a family like that, a kid in a family like that?
Yeah, I think that on the first part, when I actually coached him for a few years in football, and because I had, I coached a little bit of college football, and so I had the experience there. But I guess in seeing some of the challenges of youth sports, and we were only a middle school team, and my ultimate goal was to help those players develop to be competent football players if they wanted to go on and play in high school. And so it wasn't, I told them we were going to, the team, that we were going to compete every play and try to do our best. But the ultimate goal was not, it could be an outcome if we do things well, but the ultimate goal wasn't to win games. It was to help them develop into better football players. So we had a lot of focus on skill development in terms of passing and blocking and catching and throwing. And we kind of had a rotation system. We had one group that played offense in the first quarter, another group played defense, and then they switched in the second quarter, and then switched in the third quarter, and switched in the fourth quarter. So but even with my intentional development mindset, at times I like that competitive thing jumped in the back of my mind, and I made some bad decisions, I would say, because if I was staying true to the development, maybe I put in a player, at the end of the game that could help win the game on offense when he was supposed to be on defense. And so, um, I caught myself, and I think it's important to be honest with yourself and say, look, that wasn't a good decision based on what we laid out.
But we'll let you get to the second part of that question in a second, but a quick follow up. Did you get any backlash from parents, in the kind of the state of the world where winning at all costs is sort of, there is a bit of a trophy chasing, a coach that's really prides himself on development and not worrying about those trophies. Did you get any backlash from parents with that approach?
I guess in my first year, there certainly was, and it was more from assistant coaches that probably thought that we should be pushing winning versus development. And I thought I laid it out well, but I think that helped me understand that before the season, I needed to lay it off, and I mean, I think that's important. It's like also with referees, like, especially at youth baseball level, like these aren't experienced referees that you're getting, or umpires in baseball and referees in youth football. Like they're guys that have some time, a little bit of experience in the game, but like I always told the team, like, we're going to have bad calls. It's if we win or lose a game, it's not because we had a bad call. Promise you. And I said, so just expect it. If there's a problem and the ref's not doing a good job, I'll address it. But we're not going to make a big deal about it because it's going to happen. And so I think that helped people laying it out, saying like there's going to be bad calls. And I mean, I remember one play, we had a kid, it was the interception, and he was chasing, he'd been an offensive lineman, he was chasing the ball and didn't have his head on a swivel, and absolutely got killed by a guy blocking, and just knocked the heck out of him. And I was kind of tracking away, and then thought out of the corner of my eye. And we had one of the best referees I've ever had. And he came up to me and said, Dave, I know that sounded bad, but it was legal. And I had parents going crazy. Like they wanted me to make more of a deal. I said, look, I'm going to watch the video and find out. And one coach actually quit because I didn't make protests more. And he thought I wasn't protecting the kid. But I was pretty confident that ref, because he was really good, told me, saw it. I trusted him. And I watched the video. I called his mom and I said, I know that's hard to watch your son getting absolutely killed, but it was a legal block. You hear him fair and square, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't side on, it was right head on. And I said, it's a little bit of a lesson for him as well that, and we talked to the team about it. Like when an interception happens, you're used to being an offensive guy. You got to get your head on a swivel because they're looking for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Tough lesson to learn in that moment.
So, but I guess the ultimate thing is, and even when you set out expectations, it's not bulletproof. But I think if you set out expectations, or if your goal is development, you're going to try to do your best and compete. And eventually that hopefully leads to winning. And you certainly want to teach people how to win. But I think at that level, at some point, the game switches from development to competition and trying to win games. Like the NFL, and I guess they try to develop their guys, but ultimately it's about the coach and everyone gets hired or fired based on winning.
Yeah. Yeah. Once you start getting to higher levels, they get paid way too much to want to lose their job. So it's all about winning. All right. So let's go back to that question. Did you feel any pressure, or did you feel like you felt the pressure from your son, or like what was the dynamic at home of, living in a household like that?
I don't know. I think, I think that I would say that, and you have to ask him, but noticing him, I think there was probably some pride in some of my athletic accomplishments, but in the end, I tried to make it about him and not me. And so I I feel like he didn't have it. Like, I guess he saw a path to um, trying to be the best he could and kind of have a long career in sports. So I think it was, if I could change it another way, I think it could have been more of a benefit for him, and especially because he didn't play. Like if he would have played rugby, there probably would have been more pressure as he came up through and people started knowing who he was a little bit. Um, but I think because he played a different sport, and I always wanted him to make his own way, I don't think he felt that pressure.
That's good. Good. He carved his own path in his own sport and has done his own thing and makes his own name for himself. So that's great. Let's talk about some of the advice that you've gotten or received over the years. So as a player and as a coach, what's some of the best advice that can remember that you've ever received?
Um, I think there's a few of them. When I first made the U.S. team, and playing in my first, no, actually, I actually wasn't playing, but when I got into the team, Jack Clark, the head coach and general manager at the time, and he passed it on. This was kind of the mantra of the team, but he said, the honor is not in the selection, but in the performance. Because when you're representing the U.S., especially back then. Now you're going to play, still not a lot. You're going to play around. If you played every game for the national team, you play 11 games a year. Back then we were less than that. Sometimes 5, 6, 7 games a year. So selection was a big deal. You can imagine. So there was a lot of focus on trying to make the team, but he transitioned that to. And it's not saying that what your accomplishments to get here don't matter, but it's saying that you honor that work by performing now in the team. It wasn't just about getting selected. It's that you have the duty now to actually put on the American jersey and perform in it. It doesn't matter that the selection's done, but it's. So I think that was pretty powerful for me. A little bit of pressure maybe when I first got in the team, thinking about that in the back of my mind. But I think as I became a more experienced player, that was something that kept you sharp.
I love the phrasing of that. I'm going to use that. But I've heard a version of that on a few different occasions, especially when it came to professional baseball, where guys would just be so satisfied that they made the team that they never stay on the team, right? They just there's a difference between the guy that is, becomes satisfied of all right, I checked the box. I can now consider myself a professional athlete because I got drafted in whatever sport it is. And then they fail after that because they've reached their goal. Their goal isn't longevity in the sport. Their goal was just to make the team. And there's a difference between that mentality and the guys that, are never seem to be satisfied. Like a Tom Brady is sort of that great example of he's just never ever satisfied. He's always pushing for more greatness. Michael Jordan in his book, or the book that he was in with, I think we both read that book. I'm drawing a blank on the name, but he talks a lot about it in there as well.
Right.
Second, you had another one that was some great advice.
So, this one doesn't sound like it sounds pretty small, but I took it to be pretty important. And when I went to, it was kind of two parts. My first college football meeting, the coach, our defensive coach. So there was two parts. So our defensive coach said, if you're a part of this defense, you'll be in the first two rows in every meeting. So, I think that it shows that you're engaged. You don't want to, like, you sit in the back, you're kind of unrecognizable. You can be, it doesn't necessarily mean you are, but you can be perceived as aloof and not engaged. And I've just taken that from I was at a community meeting the other night, and I was like, I got to sit in the back of my mind, that voice was saying, you got to go sit in the front row. And it's not, maybe not in a voice anymore. It's just conditioned. If there's availability, I always try to sit in the first two rows. Cause I think it just shows that, whatever you're doing, whatever meeting you're at, it's important to you. You're not trying to hide out in the back and, um, maybe multitask or whatever, you're part of that, and you want to hear what the speaker is saying, but also maybe it's easier to see what your reaction is to what they're saying. And so I think there's just a lot of life lessons. And the second part was the head coach at the same meeting said, don't be a part of the misery loves company group, right? Because there's always going to be a time when you feel like it's not going well for you. And it's super easy to go, hey, John, did you get screwed too? Yeah, I got screwed. And, screw those guys. And that just creates I think it kind of alleviates you. And, I think that there's a big kind of off that first thing I said in terms of honors in the performance. That means that you're owning your performance.
Yeah.
Right. So if you're part of the misery loves company group, you're not owning your performance. You're blaming it on someone else. And so I think it was his way of saying, own your performance and be responsible, accountable for yourself.
Yeah, it's great advice. Love all those. And and maybe some of these are the same, but is there advice that you now give to others, like when you're coaching any sport or even in a leadership role that you're in right now, in coaching it within your profession that's not sports related? What advice are you giving to others?
I think it's somewhat of a nuanced part of those things, really, in terms of I think just, I guess, taking a step further, when you're owning your performance, you're also seeking out how to be better. And this gets into, I don't know if we were going to get into this in other parts, but I think in terms of having a good culture within the team, it's set at the top, and you have to make it safe for people to be vulnerable. And we in sport, if I think back to my career, like that would have been no one would have said that back when I was coming up. It would have been kind of soft, right? Be vulnerable, But if you really think about it, if the head of the organization, whether that's a GM or a head coach, or if they show vulnerability, meaning they admit to mistakes and say, I didn't do this, I got this right in the game, I got this wrong in the game plan, and here's what happened, and here's what I think we're going to do to fix it, or even maybe soliciting feedback, like, what do you guys think how can we do this better? That show, like, because if you have somebody if the head coach that doesn't ever make a mistake, like and this is any organization in my mind, like if the head of it doesn't admit to mistakes, which is admit to being human, we all make mistakes, then there's going to be because you're going to start looking to that misery love company or blaming someone else for what happened, in that culture, versus going, a culture of improvement is a culture of vulnerability, saying, I didn't do that great, or I did it good, but I could do it better even.
Yeah. Yeah. And if there's no vulnerability, then there's no one that's willing to take risk or even, kind of cast themselves in light, right? They just want to stay kind of like to your point earlier, like they want to be in the back row and no one sees them, because if no one sees them and they're not taking a risk, then they're never going to get in trouble. Right. And if you're in that front row and you're willing to take risks and you're willing to put yourself out there, risks will lead to some failures, but that's also going to lead to some successes. So yeah, kind of great that you tied it all together.
I think it's nuanced though, like, because if we take the baseball example, if I'm not, but if I'm a baseball coach, in general, I think, if I'm coaching the outfielders and they're saying, like, I'm not sure I can get to the ball, I think I want them going for those balls majority of the time. But as we get into performance and then it's eighth or ninth inning, and there's, it's the game's on the line, and you know, maybe it is better to not try to make that catch and then and just keep the ball in front of you, right? Like, so I
Calculated
think
risk.
it's nuanced. Yeah, it's not going for it every time.
Yeah.
But it's understanding that I want the guys to feel free to go make a play, and you know, but maybe when the game's on the line, you know, you're not gonna, if that's your idea, you're not gonna criticize them for it, but you hope to understand the where you are and the strategy, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
It may sound a bit of a cop out, but I think
No,
I think
to me,
yeah.
it's absolutely calculated risk, and it's not just a
Yeah.
lesson in sports or a game. It's a lesson in life. You could say, you
Yeah.
could use the calculated risk analogy when it comes to investing, right? Like you have the ability of time, the luxury of time to make some mistakes earlier on in your career, to take some calculated risks, but later on in your career, you should not be taking those same risks. You should be a lot safer. You should let that ball drop in front of you if you're 75 years old, where you might, dive for it when you're 25 in the investment world. So yeah, I think it's a great life's lesson and a great analogy. What's some things that kind of keep you up at night with all the changes that have occurred in sports in the last, 10 years, let alone the last 20? There's been so many different changes, club sports and all sports, the cost of everything, the travel, different coaching philosophies. What sort of pains you in what has changed lately?
I mean, I guess the whole can of worms with NIL is interesting, and um, I don't have any issue with players getting paid, but I think because it became a bit of the Wild West when it happened, I think that's a big challenge in terms of, I mean, things are never like people always want to say. And some of your other questions, I had written down things about equal versus fair. So I don't think like it's pretty hard in anywhere in life to make things completely equal, right? But you can try to treat people fairly. And so I think trying to figure that part out, certainly, um, you know, the star quarterback at Alabama is probably, within the market, it's going to make more money than a Division II player. But if we're going to start paying players, like how do we make it more fair, I guess? And so I know it's not going to be equal.
Yeah.
But I think the challenge is how do we make it fair for athletes, so it's not too much of a haves versus have-nots. I think that's a massive challenge, and I think will we have competitive teams, kind of at the lower mid-major level now with, or does it create opportunity for better athletes to go somewhere else? I don't know if we'd answer that. I think it'll be interesting to see how it goes, because certainly there'll be a lot of money for the kind of blue bloods of college sports, but does that create opportunity for some of those teams further down the pecking order of, getting athletes, maybe that missed out on or just maybe it's a development thing they haven't developed yet, and there's an opportunity for them to play at a mid-major level, and so I guess the answer is not there yet, but I think that's some of the things I throw, because I love college sports, but it would be sad to see if it was just end up being like a 15 team, especially in football. Like if it's 15 teams, or 25 or 30, and that's kind of like an NFL thing in college.
Yeah. Yeah. The jury's definitely still out. No one really knows. It could go in a lot of different directions. I do hope that the latter part of your answer ends up being the truth, which is, the cream will rise to the top. The top athletes are always going to be at those top teams, but if with roster changes and different developmental options, it could definitely make the lower mid majors better and make the division twos better, like, because the trickle down effect that could occur of, the better athletes will kind of trickle down to different levels, and it, in theory, could make it a lot better. But you also run the risk if that mid-major college can't keep up with the Joneses of the high-level colleges, then they might start dropping off, and there might be even less opportunity. That's what we don't know yet, and scares me a little bit. Scares me as well. We're coming here to the end. Appreciate all your time. I got a two-part sort of final question for you. Tell me about, first part is, what's your best overall experience of your career? Whatever it was, like, what's the one, if you were to just name one thing, like, this one point in my life was literally the best point of my life. And then flip side of that, which no one really talks about enough, is what's that saddest time of your career that, you dwell on a little bit too?
The interesting part, the best one wasn't playing, and it was when I was the general manager of the team in 2018. We had a coaching change. We went from John Mitchell to Gary Gold. Just in kind of in the 2017, and so Gary came in and then became the head coach in 2018. And I think it was down to both those guys, because certainly the previous coach put in some things that benefited the team as we went through 2018. But the long and short of it is we were playing Scotland in Houston, June 18th. And that was intentional, by the way. Scotland certainly does not like commit, if you ask guys where they'd want to play, they certainly wouldn't pick Houston in the middle of June. The Scottish guys.
Not many people would.
No. And so I think the positive thing is, not being a victim thing for our guys was they really leaned into it. And throughout the week, I just noticed this quiet confidence within the team. And we were ranked 15th. Scotland was ranked 6th in the world at the time. And so not a lot, we'd never beaten the World Rugby has at the time, and people still, they haven't been able to get rid of it, but they had certain, I don't even say the numbers because I don't believe in speaking them to be true. But they had tiers, and certainly Scotland was considered in one of the upper tiers, and we were a tier or two down. So I don't say that number because I think it's a way of the major powers keeping us down. That's my thing. So I don't allow that, that wording even in my mind. But the thing, the more to the fact is, the reality is they were 6th, we were 15th. And we'd never beaten one of those teams in the upper echelon. And so we were, I think, down 24-13 at halftime. And we came back to go ahead 30-24 with no time, but they had the ball and they were pressing on our line, and they scored at the death. So there was 29-30 with the conversion to come so in rugby, the conversion is wherever you put the ball down. So if you put it down in the corner, you got to make the conversion. You can take it back as far as you want, but it's got to be on that line of the corner. So the kick was from the corner. It was a challenging one. And there's some guy captured this amazing photo. You can, once the kicker starts his move, you can go try to chase, put him off or even knock it down if you get there in time. All 15 of the guys are in full sprint mode. You never see that. Like, usually it's one or two guys chasing, put the kicker off, but the whole team is in full sprint mode. And I don't know if it put him off at all, but all the guys are running at this guy and he missed the kick. So we beat them, and it was like, and I always sat in the box because I wanted to hear how the coaches were interacting, what they were telling the players. was just good information for me. And it was like hugging, high-fiving, crying. Amazing.
That's awesome. That's great.
So that was the most in terms of me. But then just a quick one. The women last year at Paris, winning a bronze medal. The first in rugby sevens when we actually won two gold medals in 1920 and 24, but it was in the Olympics and there was only a few teams that competed in it. So we still won gold, but that was in a different version of the games. This was rugby sevens. It came back in 2016 Olympics, and the women, I was watching. It was a weekday. Stopped work, went down, watched the game. I was screaming, running around, and crying because that was a seminal moment, and so many good things happened for the women's team after that because the Olympics are so important in our culture. They got a $4 million investment virtually hours after the game. So, and they were on every morning show, and rightly so. So that was those were the two of the best moments for me in my sports career.
Excellent.
And I guess
we gotta end it. We gotta end this on a downside. But yeah, I mean, I think that's to me. This is the reality of sports that everyone talks about the highlights, but there's struggles, and if you're gonna succeed, you gotta go through the struggle. So yeah, what is that? Not to end it on a bad note here, but what was that?
So when 9/11 happened, I was in Wales and in 2001 and so we actually had a game that night, and I'm not annoyed at the coaches now, but at the time I was like, what the? So the last thing I thought about doing, because your country's just been attacked, and I was playing a game. That was I wasn't even thinking about that, and I think it would have been the right thing to not. There was another teammate of mine. We actually lived together, and he was American as well. He was on the U.S. team as well, and I'm not sure the conversation was him because but the coaches came and sat me down and said, I know that there's been this tragedy, but we need you to play. And I guess I kind of wish I'd protested more, but I said okay, and it was not a good decision. I wasn't into the game, and we're playing a physically violent sport. It just wasn't a good decision to play that. It was probably dangerous to not be, so anyway, that was probably the worst moment in this. I can understand they didn't understand the full gravity, not being American. But for me, that was a tough one and not a good game for myself. And I think I should have told him I can't play.
I was gonna ask you that. It was obviously tough because of what happened, but was it emotionally tough because you probably knew that the right thing in that moment was to not play, and you had more of a moral dilemma than anything? That's also what made it a tough spot in your life, right?
Yeah, I think it was a moral dilemma, but for me, it was just more that I was not in the right mind to play and to be because rugby is very physical. I have one of my best friends and coaches, Tom Billis, always said, people always think when you get more fit, the game becomes easier. But he described it perfectly. He goes, no, it doesn't become easier. You just get through more work. It's a painful game to play just because your lungs are hanging out of your mouth most of the time and you're getting hit by big people. So, just that's my point is I wasn't in the right frame of mind to attack the game properly.
Right. Well, David, appreciate you sharing all aspects of your playing and coaching and parenting career, right? The good and the bad and the roller coaster of what we what we do in the sports that we play. So appreciate all your time and appreciate you coming on board. Any final parting thoughts for us?
No, I've just really enjoyed it. But you posed some really challenging questions that made me really think, and so I thought that's always an enjoyable exercise when something makes you really ponder, you know, how you operate, I guess.
Yep. Yep. Well, I appreciate you having on. I'm sure we could talk for another hour, but not every day that we have this opportunity to have, someone of your status of, again, rugby player of the decade and a Hall of Famer. So appreciate you coming on. Appreciate you taking time out of your day, and good luck with everything.